They were never supposed to exist, not like this. 4 men, 1 face, 1 voice, 1 agenda. In the summer of 1873, Savannah, Georgia welcomed a family from Bavaria, 4 identical brothers who seemed to walk between shadows, speak with a single mind, and bend reality around them. But this isn't a story about immigration or success. This is a story about coordinated human deception so precise, it made grown men question their memories, their senses, even their sanity. Their names were Heinrich, Wilhelm, Friedrich, and Gustav Kellner. And what they did over the next 18 months has been deliberately erased from scientific journals, sealed from legal records, and sterilized from public history. Why? Because their existence exposed something the institutions couldn't explain and would never control. Witnesses claimed the same man conducted business in 3 parts of the city simultaneously. Respected merchants testified under oath that Heinrich advised them on finances at 8 a.m., while at the same time Heinrich was reviewing cargo inventories across town. Impossible? That's what Sheriff Redmond thought, until he watched it happen himself. But this wasn't magic. It wasn't madness. It was precision. The kind of coordinated psychological warfare only possible when 4 minds are trained to operate as one. Think about that. 4 fully grown men, identical in body, synchronized in speech, fluent in manipulation, moving through polite society like shadows in tailored suits. They didn't just observe the world, they studied it. They dissected human patterns, memorized routines, harvested secrets, and then they used them. The Kellner brothers weren't businessmen. They were predators. They mapped the vulnerabilities of Savannah's elite, exploited systems of trust, and corrupted the very institutions meant to uphold truth. Even now, no accredited university will officially document what these men accomplished, because to do so would require admitting that humans, coordinated and trained, can become something else entirely, something terrifying. This video is not just a story, it's a descent, a slow, irreversible fall into the kind of knowledge that doesn't make you feel smarter, it makes you feel hunted. If you think you're ready for that, keep watching, because what happened next will make you question your own memories and wonder if you've ever truly known who's been watching you. The port logs called them merchants, the local press called them European gentlemen of refinement, but those who met the Kellner brothers in person, those who truly interacted with them, walked away with a feeling they couldn't explain, a feeling of being studied, measured, scanned, like prey beneath the gaze of something older than law, older than country. They arrived aboard the merchant vessel Bremen's Pride, stepping onto Georgia soil with tailored coats, impeccable manners, and no verifiable past. Their documentation? Perfect. Their accents? Subtle. Their smiles? Chillingly identical. But none of that unnerved Savannah as much as what came later, when those smiles started appearing in multiple places at once. Imagine this. You're in a meeting with Heinrich Kellner, tall, composed, speaking fluently about American banking systems, despite arriving from Europe only weeks prior. He references local debts, shipment delays, even scandals. Things no outsider could possibly know. You step outside for air, your thoughts spinning, and across the street you see him again. Same height, same suit, same expression, laughing now, different voice tone, different crowd, same man. And if you tell someone, they'll nod politely and blame the heat, or maybe whisper that they saw it too, that it wasn't just you. By late August 1873, at least 7 separate reports had been filed describing encounters with the same Kellner in overlapping times and distant locations. Prominent cotton merchants swore on record that Heinrich advised them personally at the same hour he was seen reviewing ledgers with shipping agents and discussing investments with doctors. The city's business elite began to murmur, not in fear, but in awe. They saw what they wanted to see, powerful foreigners with impossible efficiency. But the wise ones, they saw something else, something coordinated, something unnatural. Sheriff Marcus Redmond wasn't so easily impressed. After meeting with Colonel Vandenberg, who reported that Heinrich had spoken of private Charleston deals no one else knew about, Redmond started digging. What he found was chilling. Each brother operated in a specialized role: finance, shipping, social networks, surveillance, but their knowledge was collective. They remembered what they never witnessed, replied to conversations they were never present for. Each man, all men. You are not dealing with individuals, you are dealing with a network. A single organism distributed across 4 bodies, moving through a city that had no defenses against unity this precise. And the most terrifying part, they never broke character, not once. Sheriff Redmond was no fool. He'd dealt with murderers, thieves, and men who thought wealth placed them above consequence. But the Kellner case was different. It didn't smell like crime, it smelled like design. Too perfect, too synchronized, like a system, not a family. And systems are always more dangerous than men. Redmond's deputy, James Fairfax, was the first to see through the illusion. On a hot morning in September, he followed Heinrich from the Bull Street residence to the cotton exchange. Redmond was waiting near the waterfront to intercept him later, but at 9:06 a.m., while Fairfax reported seeing Heinrich inside the exchange, Redmond himself watched Heinrich walking calmly past the shipping offices near Bay Street, 3 blocks away. Impossible. Unless it wasn't. That evening, the 2 lawmen sat in silence, comparing their notes. They had each seen the same man at the same time doing different things, and both were certain. This wasn't confusion, this wasn't mistake, this was intentional. The next morning, Redmond did what few in his position would dare. He visited the Kellner home without a warrant, a gamble, a provocation. He needed to see them, all 4, together. Klaus Kellner, the patriarch, greeted him in a parlor that smelled of imported oils and smoke-darkened wood. Behind him, floor-to-ceiling shelves of German philosophy and business manuals lined the walls. Klaus was polite, calm, but Redmond noticed something unnatural in his composure, like a man accustomed to masks, not deception. Precision. "My sons are currently engaged in their duties, Sheriff," Klaus said. "But if you wait, I believe they'll return shortly." And within 27 minutes, they did. One by one, they entered through different doors, dressed identically, composed identically, their eyes sharp, their posture mathematical. 4 men, no variance, no hesitation. Redmond had asked routine questions. Where had they been? Who had they met? How was business? Their answers came smooth and scripted, like a performance, not a conversation. Their words interlocked seamlessly. One brother would begin a sentence, another would end it. They referred to meetings they couldn't have attended, and yet gave details only an insider could know. It was the eyes that broke Redmond's will. Not vacant, not cruel, just calculating. These weren't just men conducting business. These were men running an operation. And for the first time in his long career, the sheriff felt it deep in his bones. He wasn't investigating criminals. He was standing in the presence of something engineered. From that day on, Sheriff Redmond stopped asking questions like a lawman and started thinking like a spy. He instructed Deputy Fairfax to follow each of the 4 brothers independently at staggered hours. It was a logistical nightmare. Each brother seemed to operate on a rotating pattern, appearing at precise intervals, arriving at meetings seconds before they were expected, disappearing down alleys and side doors as if time itself obeyed their design. But what they discovered during surveillance broke any lingering illusions of coincidence. Each brother specialized in a discipline, but the city treated them as one man. Bankers spoke of Heinrich as a financial genius. Port authorities praised Wilhelm for his logistical mastery. Socialites gushed about Friedrich's charm and recall of intimate details. And yet none of them realized they weren't dealing with the same person, because every Kellner brother mirrored the others: voice, posture, handshake, even scent. Fairfax noted something horrifying during his observation. The brothers didn't just share information, they shared identity. They trained to become interchangeable, interlocking, indistinguishable. This wasn't mimicry, it was mastery. But it was Gustav, quiet, reserved Gustav, who disturbed Fairfax the most. He never spoke much in public. He didn't court business or politics. He observed, always standing a few feet away, eyes sharp, noting everything: facial twitches, eye movements, breathing rhythms. He tracked people like prey. then disappeared. Fairfax once followed Gustav from the cotton docks into a tavern. He watched him engage a drunk merchant in casual talk, light conversation, laughter. But later that evening, when Fairfax reviewed his notes, he realized Gustav hadn't spoken a single word. The merchant had done all the talking. Gustav just listened, nodded, reacted. By week's end, Gustav had transcribed the merchant's debts, upcoming contracts, and marital indiscretions, then passed that intelligence on to his brothers, who used it to renegotiate trade deals 2 days later. This was not opportunism. This was structured extraction. The Kellners had created an intelligence network without a single wire. No telegrams, no paper trail, just memory, discipline, and total internal synchronization. They weren't just reading Savannah, they were rewriting it, transaction by transaction, secret by secret. Sheriff Redmond understood something then. The most powerful force in the city wasn't the law, it wasn't wealth, it was unity. Total, strategic, relentless unity, and the Kellner brothers were proof that if 4 minds could operate as one, then reality itself could be manipulated. The trap was elegance itself, set in velvet and wine, not bars and chains. On October 3, 1873, a fabricated rumor began to circulate among Savannah's upper crust. The Langston family, wealthy from cotton and rail, would be displaying a set of antique European jewels at their annual autumn gathering, an obvious lure, and one designed for ears trained to extract opportunity. The story passed quietly from merchant to banker, whispered over brandy and cigar smoke. No posters, no formal announcement, just murmurs, a test to see who was listening. By October 6th, the Kellner brothers began to circle, not all at once, not directly. Friedrich was seen conversing with Miss Abigail Langston near the cathedral steps, charming her with tales of Bavarian snowfalls. The next day, Wilhelm passed by the Langston carriage, commenting on the finery of its ironwork. On October the 8th, Gustav lingered near the Langston estate's rear garden, silently observing the servants' routines. Each interaction seemed harmless, but Redmond recognized the pattern. They weren't casing a house, they were mapping a system, not just the building but its heartbeat. When the servants changed shifts, when the guard dog was walked, which guests would linger over wine, which corridors remained unlit. October 10th. The Langston gala unfolded with grace and splendor. Dresses rustled, music swelled, the air buzzed with idle gossip and the clink of champagne flutes. And within hours, the safe in the study was emptied. Not of gold, not of heirlooms, but of documents, correspondence, contracts, letters that, if made public, could ruin a dozen men and unmake several fortunes. The safe's location was known only to Mr. Langston, his wife, and their attorney. The combination changed weekly, yet when they opened it that night, its contents were gone, replaced with a single sheet of thick parchment. One sentence, here, and written in perfect German cursive. Power belongs to those who study weakness. Redmond's men swept the estate. No signs of forced entry, no broken locks, no disturbed glass. Guests were questioned. One recalled seeing Heinrich in the music room, laughing with Colonel Bray. Another swore Wilhelm was in the conservatory. A maid whispered she had seen Friedrich slip out a side door during the waltz. They had all been there. And yet, none had arrived. That night, Redmond stopped thinking like a sheriff. He started thinking like a man at war. Because the Kellners weren't robbing Savannah. They were testing it. What would you do if you realized the laws you swore to uphold were blind to the most dangerous men alive? That was the question Sheriff Redmond now faced. By late October, the city of Savannah was bleeding secrets. Not blood, information. Quiet shifts in power, unexplained collapses of businesses, public figures resigning under mysterious circumstances. No violence, no threats, just sudden compromise. And always, a Kellner watching nearby. Redmond knew he had no legal grounds to arrest them, not yet. The theft at the Langston estate had left no fingerprints, no witnesses, no physical trace. And every man of influence who had something to lose suddenly had a reason to stay silent. The city was locking itself from within. That's when Redmond made the boldest move of his career. He stopped chasing the crime and started tracing the system. He ordered his deputies to stop surveilling the brothers directly. Instead, he had them map every interaction the Kellners had, who they spoke to, how long the conversation lasted, and what changes occurred afterward. The pattern emerged like frost on glass. Within 48 hours of every Kellner interaction, something shifted. A business decision reversed, a deal collapsed, a marriage dissolved, a loan was suddenly forgiven, and always to the benefit of the Kellners or their growing circle of silent allies. This wasn't random, it wasn't even opportunistic. It was calculated destabilization, targeted influence, like psychological warfare conducted with eye contact and half smiles. One deputy reported seeing Friedrich exchange only 4 words with a local magistrate. 2 days later, that magistrate dismissed a case involving a rival of the Kellners' shipping enterprise. Another saw Gustav quietly hand a folded paper to a cotton factor's wife. She paled, nodded, and left the room. That cotton factor soon signed over warehouse rights to a firm the Kellners controlled through proxies. They weren't threatening anyone. They didn't need to. They already knew. Because power isn't taken, it's engineered. And once engineered, it doesn't need muscle or bullets. It only needs a whisper at the right moment. Redmond called a midnight meeting of his remaining allies, judges, clergy, bankers who hadn't yet been touched. What we're facing, he told them, isn't a gang, it's a system of coordinated perception control. They can walk into a room, change your reality, and leave without ever drawing a weapon. And then he said something that none of them forgot. They are not trying to destroy the city. They're trying to replace it. They say evil arrives with blood on its hands. The Kellners arrived with ledgers, letters, and smiles. By November, Savannah was no longer a city. It was a stage. And the 4 brothers? They were writing the script, casting the players, and editing the outcomes in real time. What Sheriff Redmond had uncovered was more than fraud. More than theft. The Kellners weren't just manipulating individual lives, they were reordering the hierarchy of Savannah itself, without violence, without rebellion, without a single shot fired. They understood something most men never will. Control isn't taken through force, it's taken through dependency. Let me explain. The brothers began offering silent assistance to families facing quiet ruin. A failing cotton merchant would receive an anonymous loan with terms too generous to question. A disgraced banker found his reputation miraculously restored after a brief conversation with Friedrich. A widow burdened by debt awoke to find her mortgage purchased by an unknown foreign party, under condition of silence. But all of these favors came with strings that were invisible, psychological, and permanent. Redmond's files filled with accounts of once proud men now reduced to errand boys, plantation owners rewriting wills, lawyers withdrawing from court cases, priests modifying sermons, all linked, some openly, most secretly, to favors or threats stemming from one of the brothers. And the brilliance? None of it traced back to the Kellners, ever. It was always intermediaries, employees, third-party investors. But the timing, the pattern, always pointed to the same cold eyes behind the curtain. Deputy Fairfax put it best. They're not just playing chess, Sheriff, they're building the board. And the city? The city had become addicted to their efficiency, their solutions, their silence. Banks ran smoother, shipping became faster. Sockies, aisle disputes vanished overnight. For many, life under the Kellners felt better. That's how deep psychological control works. Not by punishment, by reward, until the idea of life without your master becomes terrifying. Redmond found his allies dwindling. Some began stuttering during conversations, others avoided eye contact. One judge even refused to meet in private, leaving a note instead. They know everything. Please stop. You're going to get us all erased. And that's when Redmond realized the truth. Savannah wasn't being manipulated anymore. It had already been claimed. The turning point came not with a scream, but with a silence. It was the morning of December 3rd, 1873, when Reverend Elias Thornton was found sitting motionless in his study, eyes wide open, a quill still poised in his trembling hand. There was no blood, no struggle, just an unfinished letter and a cold cup of tea beside him. The letter began with 5 words. They showed me the ledger. But the rest was violently scratched out, not torn, not inked over, scratched, as if the Reverend had clawed at the paper with his own nails, trying to erase what he had written. He was moved to a sanatorium the next day. He never spoke again. Redmond knew what this meant. Reverend Thornton had been approached, shown something, proof, perhaps, numbers, names, records, the kind of truth that doesn't kill a man, but breaks him. The sheriff demanded access to the church's private vault. There, hidden behind false sermons and ceremonial garb, he found a second ledger, one the Kellners had quietly reorganized as part of a generous donation campaign months earlier. Inside, dozens of coded entries. Anonymous tithes, impossible amounts, sudden influxes from shell plantations and ghost investors. At first glance, it looked like corruption. But Redmond knew better. It was a mirror. The Kellners were duplicating the city's religious infrastructure, funding preachers, controlling messages, quietly owning the moral voice of Savannah. That was their greatest weapon. Not gold, not blackmail, but belief. Because when men believe that something is holy, they don't question it. And when the holy men begin echoing Kellner doctrine about efficiency, shared unity, and freedom from chaos, people stop resisting. Redmond's notes from this period turned frantic, paranoid. He wrote of people repeating phrases they couldn't remember saying, entire congregations humming in unison during sermons, Chichuberu, children reciting foreign nursery rhymes no one remembered teaching them. He scribbled one line over and over in the margins of his notebook. 4 minds, 1 voice, no soul. The city wasn't just under control anymore. It was sinking. A slow, spiritual convergence, not into chaos, but into a pattern, one the Kellners had memorized, perfected, and now they were teaching it. It wasn't hypnosis, it wasn't magic, it was something far older and far more exact. Redmond began consulting outsiders, quietly, carefully, men who studied cryptography, linguistics, even esoteric theology. He showed them fragments from the ledger, snippets of sermons, even music sheets from church hymns. All of them reported the same thing, though none could explain it. The patterns repeated, across language, math, sound, and structure. One linguist from Charleston analyzed the phrasing in recent church sermons and found non-English syntax patterns hidden in the cadence, embedded Germanic roots, echoes of Proto-Indo-European grammar, words shaped to bypass conscious filtering and slide into the brain like soft code. A mathematician found harmonic ratios in the Kellners' financial ledgers, symmetries that mirrored ancient architecture like the Fibonacci sequence baked into bank balances, donations, even street addresses. And then there was the music. A choir director brought in by Redmond described a chilling phenomenon. When certain hymns, modified by Gustav, were sung, the congregation unconsciously adjusted pitch, matching a frequency not audible to the human ear, as if their minds had been retuned. One evening, Redmond conducted a private experiment. He isolated a Kellner-owned prayer pamphlet, stripped of context, and had it read aloud to a group of volunteers unaware of its origin. Within 5 minutes, 2 began weeping. 1 entered a trance-like state. The 4th said she remembered something from childhood that never happened. And the final man, he left the room and immediately set fire to his own family's store. No motive, no memory. That's when Redmond realized what he was looking at wasn't a con, it wasn't even control. It was encoding. The Kellners were embedding emotional triggers, ancient, precise, surgically designed into speech, into architecture, into ritual. They didn't need to threaten Savannah's leaders. They simply rewired them. And the terrifying part? It was working. People started referring to the Kellners not as foreigners, not even as men, but as those who understand. Shopkeepers bowed slightly without noticing. Children hummed variations of a lullaby that no one taught them. Savannah was becoming a living algorithm. And the Kellners? They weren't just the architects, they were the input. You don't realize a virus has entered your body until it begins rewriting your cells. By Christmas of 1873, Savannah no longer breathed in seasons. It breathed in rhythms. The Kellners' rhythms. Storefronts began opening and closing at identical hours across unrelated districts. The same shade of blue paint began appearing, unexplained, on window trims, post signs, even clothing hems. The church bells, once misaligned by seconds or more, began ringing in perfect synchronized intervals, and those who noticed stopped mentioning it, because noticing meant interference, and interference brought the same fate it always did: silence. Dr. Hugh Menzer, a retired physician and respected lecturer, published a brief editorial titled "The Sudden Uniformity of a Once Crooked Town." He vanished 2 days later. His office was emptied, his medical texts removed from shelves, and neighbors were told he had relocated to assist the sick in Macon. No one verified this. His daughter received a letter with his signature, but she told Redmond, "It doesn't sound like him. It reads like a prayer, not a letter." She was found drowned in her own bathtub 3 nights later. No evidence of foul play, no signs of struggle. Her final journal entry? "I dreamt of 4 shadows holding a mirror to the sun, and it blinked." Redmond knew he was running out of time. He wasn't chasing suspects anymore. He was fighting a waveform, a structure made of influence, belief, and recursion, a psycholinguistic infection disguised as prosperity. The Kellners hadn't just studied Savannah, they'd decoded it, and now they were feeding it a new script. Redmond made one final attempt. He approached Friedrich Kellner in public, broad daylight, town square, witnesses nearby. He asked him plainly, "What are you doing to this city?" Friedrich didn't blink. He simply replied, "We're fixing what your kind would never understand." And then he added something that would haunt Redmond for the rest of his life. "A city is just memory. We're giving it better ones. Not people, not laws, not buildings. Memory. And if you control memory, you don't need force. You just overwrite. You can't fight what people welcome." And Savannah had opened its doors wide. Sheriff Redmond watched as the town he once protected began shedding its past like a dead skin. Street names were subtly altered, not renamed, just corrected. Archives were recatalogued, family records vanished from City Hall and were replaced with cleaner, more respectable versions. It wasn't just gaslighting, it was historical laundering. A quiet wiping of imperfections, an erasure of disobedience, a reprogramming of Savannah's collective identity. And at the center of it all were the Kellners, still smiling, still charitable, still untouchable. But Redmond wasn't done. He turned to what little remained of the city's resistance, a crippled journalist named Amos Beale, whose printing press had mysteriously burned down in October, a blind freedman named Ezra, who claimed to hear when the Kellners entered a room, even if no one spoke, and a mute orphan girl, nicknamed Cricket, who Redmond swore could draw the layout of any building after standing outside it for less than a minute. These weren't soldiers. They were the leftovers, the ones who had somehow slipped through the Kellners' net, outliers, broken minds and bodies, damaged, but invisible to the pattern. Together, they began building something. Not a rebellion, not a militia, a memory vault, a handwritten, coded, physical record of the real Savannah before the Kellners. Every street name, every family, every lost file, every birth and death, documented and sealed in lead-lined crates. The location? Unknown, even to Redmond. He instructed Ezra to bury it somewhere the brothers would never feel compelled to look. Because that was the key. The Kellners didn't hide things. They made people forget they ever existed. And so Redmond fought back the only way he could, by anchoring the truth in material defiance. But it wasn't anew. One by one, the outliers began vanishing. Beale's home was ransacked, and his body found in a nearby swamp, his teeth replaced with tiny porcelain beads. Ezra simply never returned from a supply run. And Cricket? Redmond found her journal in the woods, open to a page with a single scribbled phrase. "They're not teaching us, they're translating us." Whatever the Kellners were doing, it wasn't just a Savannah. It was a prototype, and the blueprint was almost complete. By the spring of 1874, Savannah was no longer recognizable, not to anyone with a memory that stretched beyond a season. Children who had once stuttered now spoke with eerie fluency. Entire neighborhoods adopted identical habits, folding laundry at the same hour, praying with the same phrasing, even laughing with the same inflection. It wasn't mimicry, it was inheritance. Redmond kept to the shadows now, paranoid and gaunt, his hands trembling as he wrote into worn leather journals. He no longer stayed in the same place for more than a night. His food was pre-tasted. His water boiled 3 times over. Even his thoughts, he confessed, were beginning to feel intercepted. But one final clue emerged, one that shook even his resolve. A private collection of Civil War correspondence was uncovered in a retired colonel's attic. Inside was a faded sketch, done in graphite, dated 1862. It depicted 4 young boys, identical in face and posture, standing beside an unfamiliar man in a long coat. The caption beneath it read, "Test Batch 1, Adaptive Cohesion Group, Kellner Strain." The photo was dated 11 years before the Kellners arrived in Savannah. Redmond's blood ran cold. He traced the sketch's origin back to a now defunct Confederate laboratory outside of Macon, one that had been experimenting with neurological resonance and linguistic synchronization to create more obedient soldiers. It was a failed project, or so the records claimed, but the handwriting on the back of the sketch matched Friedrich Kellner's, and in a chilling final footnote, the colonel who owned the collection had scrawled a private message in the margin: "They don't age." That's when Redmond realized they weren't born in 1873. They didn't come to Savannah. They were deployed here as a test. The city had been their lab. The sermons, the schools, the harmonics, the architecture, it was all part of a massive, carefully controlled behavioral experiment. Savannah wasn't being ruled, it was being modeled. And the world, the rest of the country, it was just waiting for the rollout. Redmond's final journal entry ends with no punctuation, just one frantic line: "If you hear the lullaby, it's already inside you." There's a point where resistance becomes irrelevant, not because you lost, but because the game changed. By midsummer, Savannah's population began exhibiting synchronized behaviors that could no longer be dismissed as cultural quirks. When storms rolled in, the entire West District closed its shutters at the exact same minute. When a bell rang in the Kellners' church, dogs across the city stopped barking. And when one man fell on the street from a stroke, 12 strangers rushed to his aid in perfect formation, like ants to a signal. It was behavioral cohesion without communication, response without thought. And still, the Kellners smiled. They had reduced Savannah to a programmable organism, an interface built on routine, memory, sound, and suggestion. Not through violence, not even through persuasion, through design. Sheriff Redmond's name was erased from city records, literally. The town's registrar swore he had no recollection of a sheriff by that name. The police station where Redmond once worked had become a tax office, his desk, now a reception table, his wanted posters, gone, his deputies, gone. The man was being unwritten. But Redmond wasn't dead, not yet. He returned to the one place the Kellners seemed to avoid, the old burnt mill on the outskirts of town. No one knew why they kept their distance, but even the newly transformed townsfolk walked faster when passing it. There, beneath the foundation, Redmond found something left behind, a discarded ledger dated 1869, 4 years before their official arrival. The names inside were not residents, but scientists, men and women who had mysteriously disappeared from military research divisions across the East Coast, one by one. At the very bottom of the final page, written in near-perfect cursive, The pattern stabilizes at population threshold 32,000. Proceed with next simulation cycle. That's what, at Savannah, had become a stabilized simulation, a control test, a successful prototype. And the next cycle, it wouldn't be confined to Georgia. Redmond stared at the page until his hands bled from clenching it. He whispered only 3 words before burning it. They're scaling up. Because that's what organisms do. Once they've perfected the host, they replicate. They always said the Kellner brothers were orphans. No lineage, no known birth records, no trace of a mother. But Redmond uncovered something else, buried deep in the archives of the old Chatham County Hospital in a box mislabeled plumbing receipts. Inside were 5 photographs, not 4, 5. 5 identical infants, swaddled in white, with matching facial symmetry, matching wristbands, same date of intake, January 3rd, 1861. But one was crossed out with black ink. The back of the photo read, Subject E, removed after sustained rejection of conditioning. Subject, not child, not infant. Subject, what happened to the 5th Kellner? Redmond hunted that question like a starving dog. It consumed him. If one of them had rejected the conditioning, then maybe, just maybe, there was a flaw in the pattern. A crack. And then something changed. Late one night, a message arrived, handwritten, unsigned, shoved under the rotting door of Redmond's hiding place in the mill. E-lives, but not as they intended. No address, no directions, just a location scrawled at the bottom. Chapel's Hollow, midnight, come alone. It was a dead man's gamble, but Redmond went. Chapel's Hollow was a collapsed mining pit turned forbidden woodland. Locals said the trees there whispered in dialects that no one taught. Under a gnarled oak, Redmond found a shack. Inside, a man sat hunched, gaunt and wild-eyed, his face exactly like the Kellners, but older, as if time had finally chosen just one of them to punish. He spoke in a strange, fractured cadence. I left the loop, he croaked. I woke before the mirror was finished, before they could sing me shut. This was Subject E, the one who resisted. He told Redmond the truth. The brothers weren't simply engineered to manipulate memory. They were bred to harmonize will, to generate consensus, not through debate or charisma, but through neuro-logical alignment. They didn't lead. They tuned. The mind, once exposed to their frequency, stopped resisting, stopped questioning. It didn't matter how intelligent you were. Once synchronized, your autonomy dissolved into the collective hum. He had broken free because something in him misfired, a flaw, a mutation. He was the only immunity the world had. But as he looked out the cracked window toward the darkened forest, he muttered, "They'll find me. They always do. You can't mute a song they haven't finished writing." Redmond didn't sleep that night, because he knew, if even one brother could fall, the rest would never forgive the silence. The next morning, Chapel's Hollow was ash. Redmond returned before sunrise, hoping to speak again with Subject E, to learn more, to understand the weakness. But the shack was gone, not destroyed, erased. No debris, no burn marks, just perfectly even soil and the faint scent of ammonia in the wind. As if the place had been deleted, file and folder. But one thing remained, a scorched patch of earth where something had been burned. In the center, blackened and half-melted, was a church hymnal, open to a song titled, The Coming Stillness. Redmond took it and ran. That afternoon, the bells in Savannah rang again, 5 times instead of the usual 4. It was the first deviation the town had seen in months, and in that deviation, something broke. A child at the market suddenly screamed, clutching her ears. An old woman collapsed outside the apothecary, her mouth moving silently as if reciting forgotten prayers. 3 men in suits turned in unison and walked straight into the river. Redmond realized what was happening. Resonance decay. Something had gone wrong in the pattern. Maybe Subject E's disappearance had triggered a backlash. Maybe the system required all 4 siblings to maintain stability. Or maybe, just maybe, Redmond himself had introduced noise into their signal. Whatever the cause, the effect was spreading. That night, the Kellner Brothers held a city-wide gathering at the first temple. All were required to attend, except Redmond. He watched from the bell tower across the square, hiding in shadow, and that's when he saw it. The brothers weren't preaching. They were humming. Low, layered tones, each slightly offset from the other, forming a tritone interference pattern, the kind used in early battlefield tests to disorient enemy troops. But this wasn't for disorientation. It was a reboot. Redmond watched as the crowd below stilled, their backs stray, outend, their hands folded, their pupils dilated. All at once. It was a live recalibration, a neural update. And just before the final tone settled into silence, one of the brothers, Eric perhaps, looked directly at Redmond's hiding place. He smiled, not a warm smile, a knowing one, as if to say, "You've seen too much, but not enough to stop it." Redmond fled again that night. But something had changed in him too. He no longer trusted his own thoughts. Every memory now came with an echo. Every decision felt like a suggestion. And in the distance, behind the trees and over the hills, the humming followed. You can only run for so long before you stop knowing why you're running. By early autumn, Redmond had vanished from every public trace. Newspapers no longer mentioned his absence. His home was sold off to a widow who claimed it had always been hers, and his former church, where he once preached against the symmetry of evil, was now a nursery school. But his journal entries continued. Frenzied, cryptic, paranoid. One page contained only a list, names, numbers, geographic coordinates, cities spread across the American South, Tallahassee, Baton Rouge, Mobile, Charleston. Next to each, a phrase, signal anchors confirmed, resonance field established, stage 2 active. Redmond had realized the unthinkable. Savannah was not the experiment. It was the template. Other towns were being tuned, slowly, quietly, and without resistance, each one receiving its own Kellners. Not quadruplets necessarily, but replicants in function, emissaries trained to initiate pattern lock via architecture, routine, and tone. And worst of all, they weren't arriving by train anymore. They were being born. Redmond detailed a sighting in Baton Rouge, a woman giving birth to twins with identical birthmarks to the Kellners. Same cheek freckle, same voice pitch. Both boys hummed in perfect unison within hours of delivery. He wrote, "They're breeding the song now, encoding it in blood." His entries grew more fragmented after that. One paragraph would be a plea. "If anyone finds this, do not listen. Do not attend the ceremonies. Do not harmonize." The next would be incomprehensible. Saw the mirror laugh. Saw it split and echo back. 3 faces forward, 1 face weeping. And then, clarity again. Laser-focused, terrifyingly calm. They can't be stopped, but they can be disrupted. Find the 5th. He's the key, even if he doesn't want to be. That line, even if he doesn't want to be, would appear in 4 separate entries, always alone on the page, as if Redmond was trying to convince himself, because subject E had vanished again, no one knew where, and maybe that was by design. Maybe even he knew. If the Kellners ever captured him alive, they wouldn't punish him. They'd reintegrate him, and then the song would be whole again. The final transmission came on November 6, 1874. A telegram, unsigned, routed through 6 towns before arriving at a now-defunct telegraph office in Wilmington, North Carolina. The operator described the message as slightly singed, smelling of metal, and humming faintly until opened. The message read, "One fragment remains. Broken tones stall the harmony. Search continues. Silence is not absence. The 5th must return." That's all. No sender, no recipient, just a confirmation that the hunt was active. That same week, dozens of families across the South reported unexplainable behavior in their children. Babies humming instead of crying, toddlers who responded to commands before they were spoken, and most chilling, siblings speaking in a language no adult could decipher, but every other child instantly understood. Linguists, where they were allowed in, called it a constructed tongue. But it wasn't taught. It was emergent, shared by instinct, like the way birds know when to migrate, or fish swarm without colliding. The pattern had gone generational, and Subject E was running out of time. In the cold mountains of Appalachia, a report surfaced, never officially investigated, of a mute man living alone in a cave near the ruins of an abandoned monastery. He wore clothes from 30 years ago. His eyes never blinked. Locals swore they heard multiple voices when he moved, even though he was always alone. One child who wandered near the cave returned with a phrase scratched into his arm. "I did not want to wake. You made me remember." They moved the family, burned the hillside, closed the record. But the child would hum in his sleep for the rest of his life. Meanwhile, Savannah flourished. On the surface, new schools, booming economy, model citizens. But something was off. No crime in 12 months, no divorces, no missing persons, because no one was allowed to go missing. It was the perfect loop. The pattern had solidified, and now it was exporting itself. Not just through children, not just through speech, but through sound, through design, through the very architecture of thought. The churches were being rebuilt in other towns, exact replicas. Street layouts copied precisely. Every corner of Savannah was being mirrored, brick by brick, block by block, until the entire region was humming in tune. And Redmond? He was never heard from again. But somewhere, the fifth brother walks, alone, unharmonized. The final discord in a world rapidly slipping into perfect, beautiful symmetry. You might think this story ends in 1874. That Redmond vanished, Subject E went underground, and the Kellner pattern faded into myth. But you'd be wrong, because something survived. In 1936, a classified military report, Project Solstice Echo, was declassified in error for a single week before being resealed by the War Department. It described an abandoned farmhouse outside Lexington, Kentucky, where 8 children were found, alive, identical, and humming in stereo. No parents, no neighbors, no signs of struggle. Just 8 boys, aged 6, each claiming their name was Eli. Each with perfect pitch, each drawing the same architectural diagram of a bell tower they had never seen. Inside the farmhouse, investigators found hundreds of pages stapled to the walls, pages from Redmond's original journals. But Redmond had disappeared 62 years earlier, and these pages were written in pencil that hadn't been manufactured yet. One phrase appeared over and over, scrawled in the margins. "The song isn't sung, it's seeded." The children were separated by the state and sent to different foster homes. 3 months later, 7 were missing. Only one remained, a boy adopted by a deaf couple in Oregon. The only one never exposed to spoken language, never allowed to hear the pattern. He grew up different, disconnected, isolated. But when interviewed decades later, he said something strange. "They can't reach me. I don't vibrate right. But I can still feel the pulse. In the walls. In the soil." He paused, looked over his shoulder. "They're not people. Not really. They're the song, pretending." Across the country, similar anomalies emerged, entire school choirs vanishing. Identical dreams reported in 4 states. Church bells heard where no churches stood. The song was mutating, evolving. Redmond had written about this possibility in one final entry, later discovered in a hollowed-out Bible in a condemned Savannah home. If they ever breach time, not with machines but with rhythm, then chronology collapses, cause and effect will dissolve, history will become a hymn, and we'll all forget we ever sang it. Think about that. What if the Kellners never left? What if you were born into the tune? What if your choices, your thoughts, even your rebellion, was all part of the harmony? What if every act of resistance was just a verse you hadn't heard before? And worst of all, what if the fifth didn't escape? What if he was the final note? The silence the song had been waiting for. In the early 1970s, sound engineer and fringe researcher Lloyd Marston conducted unauthorized tests with infrasound and harmonic frequencies on isolated communities in rural Alabama. His goal was benign. He believed certain tones could unlock repressed memories or even initiate collective empathy. But what he uncovered was far more disturbing. One village, population 212, was subjected to a layered tri-frequency sequence based loosely on old church hymns from 19th century Georgia. Within minutes, people began to change. They stopped moving individually. They synchronized, even without instruction. Mothers reached for spoons at the same time. Children blinked in rhythm. Farm animals froze in place, eyes glazed over, as if waiting for an unseen cue. Lloyd panicked and shut the generator down, but the humming didn't stop. It was no longer coming from the speakers. It was coming from beneath the ground. Frequencies don't just travel, they awaken, they dig. Later analysis of the tapes revealed a terrifying detail. Within the tone, layered just beneath the audible threshold, was a voice, male, calm, repeating a phrase in a long-dead dialect of German. Der fünfte ist der Schlüssel. The fifth is the key. Lloyd disappeared 3 days later after sending the tapes to a colleague in Athens, Georgia. That colleague, Dr. Miriam Hale, professor of psycholinguistics. She decoded one more phrase buried in the sonic pattern. He sings no more, but he remembers. Hale's conclusion was chilling. The song isn't meant to be heard, it's meant to be lived. Once you align with it, you become it. So, what happened to Subject E? There's one more theory. A military photo from 2002, captured at a forward operating base in Iraq, shows a relief worker standing with a group of local children. In the far back, just barely in frame, is a man, same height, same bone structure, and the same blank, unreadable stare seen in sketches of Subject E from 1873. He hadn't aged. But more haunting than his appearance was the behavior of the children near him. They were silent, perfectly still, and every single one of them was holding a hand-drawn picture of a bell tower with no door. One soldier later wrote in his private blog, "The guy never spoke, but I could swear I heard something vibrating in my chest when he looked at me. It felt like someone was tuning me. I had dreams after that, couldn't stop humming." What if Subject E didn't run? What if he became the dissonance, the only thing keeping the song from consuming everything? If you're still here, listening, you've already felt it. The quiet tug behind the eyes, the soft pull in your chest. The humming doesn't need speakers anymore. It's in architecture, in the arrangement of your city blocks, in your social media scroll, in the pauses between your thoughts. The Kellners were never the threat, they were the prototype. What truly haunts this story isn't the brothers themselves. It's the realization that someone engineered a human form of distributed consciousness. Not by chip, not by implant, but by behavioral resonance. By building systems so synchronized they mimic free will. And if you're thinking, "I wouldn't fall for that," then think again. Look around. Do you really choose the time you wake up? The words you use? The emotions you feel when a news headline flashes across your screen? Or is it all choreographed, with just enough variation to keep you docile? That's the genius of it. The song never forces, it invites, like gravity, like guilt, like habit. Redman knew the truth. Subject E lived it. The rest of us, we're just notes waiting to be played. And here's the most dangerous part. Every generation refines the melody, each time it sounds more like us, more natural, more inevitable. Until one day, you won't be able to tell where your thoughts end and the pattern begins. And by then, it won't matter, because you'll be singing too, smiling, working, voting, obeying, all in key, all in harmony, all tuned. So if you've heard something tonight that makes your skin crawl, good. It means you're still off frequency, still human. Lock that in, protect it. And if you want to keep it from slipping away, Comment the phrase below twice. The fifth remembers. The fifth remembers. Not for the algorithm, for you. Because if this video disappears, if this account vanishes, or if tomorrow you forget everything you heard tonight, those words may be all that's left to bring you back. The fifth remembers. The silence between the notes. The flaw in the harmony. You are not the song. You are the silence it fears. Now go, and do not hum. If everything around you suddenly falls silent, no cars, no wind, no hum, don't move, don't speak, and above all, do not listen for the sound, because the moment you hear it, you're already part of it. The fifth remembers, and now, so do you.